Wasn't that fun? So we got more of those to look forward to over the next 2 weeks. So as we start the series, I have a confession that I need to make before we really get going. And that is, I am an end of the world, like, nut. I just get geeked out about it. I am fascinated with the whole idea. So, like, I don't know how many of you are familiar with, like, the Left Behind books that put a narrative to what's going to happen at the end of the world. I read all of those, like most of them within 3 days. Before I graduated from high school, I read 3 different books on interpreting end-time prophecy, which I think explains my massive amount of friends as well. I think those are correlated. And I just think, like, the whole idea is absolutely fascinating. I just get geeked out about it. And there's some cool things. So, like, basically how we understand it is Jesus called his own crucifixion and resurrection. He said, hey, they're going to kill me, and I'm going to come back from the dead. And then he said he's going to return. And we always think we're going up to heaven. He said, no, I'm going to start a kingdom down here on this earth. And so he gave all these signs, like, hey, these things are going to happen. These are going to take place before it happens. And so we're always trying to figure out. And there's been a couple things that have just, like, blown my mind. I think they're so interesting that I wasn't going to let the series go by without sharing them. So, like, one of them has to do with the nation of Israel. And so if you read end-time prophecy anywhere in the Bible, the nation of Israel, of the Jewish people, plays a pretty pivotal, pretty central role. Now, the problem with that is that for 2,000 years, there was no nation of Israel. And so people who, like, studied this stuff, they were just like, they had no idea what to do with it. Because it's like, well, it says nation of Israel, but there is no nation of Israel. So what does that mean? What do we do with that? And some people, like, they just disregarded it entirely. And other people, like, well, it must mean, like, the nation of Jewish people, like a metaphor, like wherever the Jewish people are scattered. And so, like, people really didn't know what to do with it because the nation of Israel played a central role. And then in 1948, the nation of Israel was created, which is just amazing because what happened after World War II and all the atrocities that happened with the Holocaust, there was this incredible groundswell of a movement that the only way for the Jewish people to protect themselves from anti-Semitism and other people who would do horrid things to them was for them to create their own nation of just Jewish people. And so what happened was, in order for this to take place, 700,000 Palestinian people, who were mostly Muslims and some Christians, 700,000 Palestinian people had to be displaced from their homes. Some of them, their families had lived in that area for 2,000 years. Were kicked out of their homes for the nation of Israel to be created. And then, like, the most crazy thing about all this is that, like, other governments recognize the nation of Israel. And the United States was one of the first. They're like, oh yeah, we believe in them, we'll recognize their government, they're legitimate. Like, think about how nuts that would be if that happened today. If all of a sudden almost 1 million people were kicked out of their homes, and we were just like, yep, cool. But all of a sudden, now we have a nation of Israel. And so all these different things in Bible prophecy, like, oh, this could make sense. This could fit. Another one of them is that I think is so interesting is in the book of Revelation. It talks about the mark of the beast. And no one really knows what the mark of the beast is. People are like, is it like, I don't know, is it like a mark? Is it like a tattoo? Is it something that happens? And people are like, is it like the X that you get when you go into a club showing that you paid? Like, yeah, there we go. That's the mark of the beast. And people, they can't quite figure it out. And then and one of the things that it says in the book of Revelation is that when the mark of the beast comes, you can't buy or sell if you don't have the mark of the beast. And so I'm aware of this, and it was probably about 10 or 15 years ago, I was reading an article online about identity theft. And this is like when people were like really freaking out about identity theft, and I was like, what does this mean? Do I cut up everything? Do I cut up my credit cards? We didn't really know how to protect ourselves. And this article was on how the reason why we have such issues with identity theft is we have all these different things that could be stolen. You've got your social security number, your birth certificate, your driver's license, your credit cards, and we have all these separate pieces of information. And so what the article was about a computer chip that would take the place of all those things. So instead of having credit cards, you just have this computer chip. Instead of having Social Security, you just have this, which is kind of similar to Apple phone as we're getting closer there. But so it's interesting. So I'm reading all these different things, and then at the end of the article, it says this. It says that they're hoping that someday they'll be able to place this computer chip in people when they're born, and that will serve as their marker for the rest of their lives. And then the last line of the article was, and it could be placed in someone's right hand or forehead. And I'm like sitting there and I'm reading it, and all of a sudden I'm just like, what? It didn't even say hand. Like if it would have just said either of their hands in their forehead, I probably would have been okay. But it deliberately said in the article, it could be placed in their right hand or their forehead. And I'm just like, oh, this is it. This is how it's going down, I'm sure. And then there's all this stuff recently. I'm sure some of you have followed it. Others of you, you've just been tormented on it on your Facebook posts and Twitter feeds and stuff about the whole thing on the 4 blood moons. And basically what this comes down to, and understand this is coming from a geek, okay, on it. There are some really vague references in Bible prophecy to this thing on the blood moons. There are very vague references to the blood moons. But people have like just gone flipped out recently because in the span of about a year, there's these 4 blood moons, which look really, really cool, by the way, in an eclipse, and all of them take place on significant Jewish holidays. And so people have seen it, they're like, oh my goodness, what is this? What's it mean? What's happening? And I want to tell you, after spending too much time, and I'll admit this, too much time studying it and talking about it and reading different things, I really believe I have found a key to understanding Bible prophecy of end times. Now, this doesn't explain everything, okay? But for all the people who sit down and make predictions, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen when, I really think I found a key to understanding Bible prophecy. And it actually comes from something Jesus says, and this is what he says. He says, therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. That's it. Aren't you impressed? Really, I think that is the key to understanding Bible prophecy. You don't know the day or the hour. And so people come at it like, hey, what's the mark of the beast? I don't know. In fact, Jesus says I'm not going to go. What is the meaning to the 4 blood moons? No idea. Really, no, they look cool, but I have no idea. And in fact, I'm really confident in this because Jesus says we're not going to know. And I think this is significant because when people usually look at Bible prophecy and end time stuff, they think that the reason why we have prophecy is to make predictions. Is that all of a sudden, let's set a date and things are going down at this point in time and we need to figure out how all these things line up calendar-wise, and then we can figure out the day that Jesus is going to return. And I think that is so ridiculous because Jesus himself said, you don't know. And I feel like every 5 or 6 years, there is some new person who comes out who all of a sudden like compiles this weird list of scriptures together and all of a sudden sets a date. And so like there was one from like Family Radio or something like that happened in 2011 or 2012. And people freaked out about that. And then we had the whole Y2K thing. Do we remember Y2K? And like some people like tried to fit it in scripture as to how Y2K was in scripture. And so it was like, well, the number, it's the year 2000. In this verse, it says 2000, but it says Canaanites. And Canaanites and computers start with the same letter. So that must be what it means. And that's the end of the road. And it was just like, what? What is going on here? And every single time one of these predictions happens, I'll get a message from someone who's just like, hey, I don't know what to think about this. What do you think? And this is usually my response. The best way for us to be sure that Jesus isn't coming back is for us to make a prediction that that's the date. Like, right? So like when everyone goes, hey, April 13th, I go, hey, he says we don't know the day or the hour. So I am sure that it's not April 13th. And I think that, I don't know if that's like a biblical loophole, that if you have like an important date coming up, that you want to make sure Jesus doesn't come back before then. You just call it out, like April 12th, I'm getting married, and Jesus is coming back, just to make sure that he doesn't come back the day that you get married. So that works well. And I think people, they get so caught up in this, and they think the purpose of prophecy, the reason why we have it, is to make all these outlandish predictions. And I think it's actually quite the opposite. And the way that I look at it, the real reason why we have prophecy, instead of looking at it like predictions, we should view it like a March Madness tournament bracket. Now, to explain why that is the case, we need to look at a story from Scripture. So, if you have your Bible with you, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 25 today. And we're going to be looking at a story that starts in verse 1 and goes to verse 13. And the setup for this story is really simple. So what happens is Jesus is there and he's got his closest followers around him. And his closest followers, his disciples, they don't really know what to ask, but they're intrigued, like we are, about all this end time stuff. And so they come up to him and they go, hey, End times. Who, like what, when, how, where, just, could you just talk about it? Because we're kind of worried and we don't really know what to ask. And so they just kind of go, hey, end times, Jesus, will you please, will you talk about it? And in response, Jesus tells 3 stories. And you have to hold that in context, because this is his response to a question on the end times. And these 3 stories, they need to all be tied together. And we're only going to look at the first one today. That's why we kind of gave you the cards throughout the series, so you could see how they all tied together. And so today we're going to look at the first story, the story that he tells in response to their question on the end times. And so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to read this story through once. I'm going to read it pretty quick, and then I'm going to come back and explain the context of it. So this is Matthew chapter 25, verse 1 through 13. And if you're weirded out by that picture, it'll make sense in a second. So it says this: at that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. I want to pause real quick. This is the only time I'm going to pause the first time. When you see the word virgins, you need to read that as bridesmaid or usher or attendants in the wedding. It is just their way in the first century of understanding who these people were and how they were invited to the wedding. And I've heard people teach this, and they have overemphasized that whole thing and talked about how this is the thing on purity, this is this, and how the only people who are getting into heaven are virgins. And it's like, no, that's not what this story is about. That has nothing to do with it. And if you have a question on what a virgin is, that's another message. We'll cover that another time. It actually cracks me up. We had this joke that in youth ministry, and we cover all different things like on Wednesday nights here at Student XP, but for people in youth group, they have 3 questions. They want us to deal with 3 issues: sex, end times, and will there be sex in the end times? That, we really don't care. Let's keep going. So, we'll be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight, the cry rang out, "Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, our lamps are going out." "No," they replied, "there may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves." But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the others also came. "Lord, Lord," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied, "Truly I tell you, I don't know you. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour." Now here's the thing. We don't know an enormous amount about first century Palestinian wedding culture. We do know some, but there's no idiot's guide to first century weddings or anything like that. So a lot of the information would have just been assumed. But we know enough to know that there's some unusual things in it. But this is basically how the setup went. So if a couple was going to get married, what would happen is the groom would take a small group of his friends and family, and they would go to the bride's house. And there, as they were at the bride's house, they would have the wedding ceremony. Now, wedding ceremonies for them were really, really small. Okay? It was a small group of friends and a small group of family. Now, because the thing that everyone was focused on was the reception. Nobody wanted to go to the ceremony. Everybody went to the celebration. Which you think, man, that's a custom that I wish we bring back, right? Do you want to go to a wedding? No. I want cake. Maybe I'll endure the wedding to get to the cake, but I don't really want to. And so that's kind of how it works. And they had this fantastic deal. So he would go to the bride's house. They would have a small ceremony, because eventually they would go back to the groom's house where they would live later in life, and they would have this huge party. Their celebrations were unbelievable. A lot of times they would last for an entire week. Think about that. A wedding reception that lasts for an entire week. And every time someone in your village got married, everyone took a week off work, because everyone went to the party to celebrate that. And I thought that, man, I do 6 or 7 weddings a summer. I usually perform 2 or 3. I wouldn't ever have to work. if we did that, like that would be amazing. And so like that's kind of how it went. So they go there, they'd have the ceremony, and then what would happen, this is not like a time thing because they had an entire week, so it wasn't like, hey, reception starts at 9 p.m. Make sure you're there on time. What they would do is when they finally decided to go, they'd start a parade back to the groom's house. And everyone who was a friend or family member or wanted to come to the wedding, what they would do is they would stand alongside the road with a lamp. And that was kind of their way of identifying themselves. That, hey, we're waiting for you, we've been here. And then when they pass, they join the parade and go back to the party. Now, as they stood there with their lamps were really primitive, which you could understand because it's the first century. It was basically a cloth that had been dipped in oil and lit on fire. And sometimes it would actually sit in oil, so the oil would continue to soak up into the cloth, so the cloth wouldn't burn up. And so that was it. It was a cloth dipped in oil that was set on fire. And how it describes it in the story is that we have one group of people who brought an extra set of oil with them because they had no idea when the parade was going to pass by. The other group only had some. And so that's kind of the setup for the story. Now, we don't see it because we live in the 21st century, but for those people who heard this story, there would have been some really weird things. Like as Jesus told it, there would have been some peculiar things to them that they would have wanted explained. And I want to go through and show you a couple of them. So first off, the story starts like this. Jesus clarifies that 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. Now that's really significant. And Jesus shows us, hey, this is what this story is about. It's about foolishness and wisdom. It's not about faithfulness and unfaithfulness. It's not about those who believe and those who don't believe. It's about those who are wise and those who are foolish. Now, every time the Bible talks about foolishness and wisdom, it's telling us something about how we live our lives. The way in which we live our lives. So again, this is not about your beliefs. This is about how you live your life. And then the story continues. I'll go through this fast. So foolish ones, lamps, didn't take any. Wise ones had lamps. Everybody became drowsy, fell asleep. Keep going. Cry rang out. Here comes the bridegroom. Woke up, trimmed their lamps. Foolish one says, give us some of your oil. Ours are going out. And then this is what happens next. It says their response is no, they replied. There may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves. Isn't their response kind of shocking in a story that Jesus tells? Like, they have oil. They need oil. They're right there. Hey, can we have some? No. Like, when all of a sudden did Jesus become against sharing? Like, how did this happen? That, like, the moral of the story is be stingy. And it almost stands in contrast to other stories Jesus tells. Like, one of the most famous stories that Jesus tells is the story of the Good Samaritan. Of this guy who's walking along the road one day, sees a person in need, puts him up on his own donkey, takes him to an inn, pays for his medical care, help make sure that he gets better. And that guy's commended. And then all of a sudden we have this strange story where all these people need is a little bit of oil, and these guys go, no, we only have enough for ourselves. And I do think this, like if you're, those of us, like it's not just a kid thing, some of us adults too. If you struggle with sharing, like if you're kind of stingy, like this is the Bible verse you want to memorize, right? Like just think of it, like you're out to eat, sitting down at dinner, order dessert, your wife or your significant other doesn't. And of course, when it eventually comes out, she'll ask that question, oh, could I just have a bite of yours? And how do you respond? Do you respond Matthew 25:9? No. There won't be enough for both of us. Go and buy some for yourself. Like, this is awesome, guys. This is perfect. Matthew 25:9. Everyone has memorized the Bible verse for next day. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to use it. Now here's the thing. This is what I want you to see. This is not emphasizing that we shouldn't share. The point that he is making is that you can only account for yourself. Okay? The point that he is making is that you can only account for yourself. Now that'll make sense later as we get into it. So if that kind of trips you up, just hang on to that, because that'll make sense later. And then here's 2 other things that stick out on this. And so it says, they went in and the door was shut. Now if you're there and you're hearing this story in the first century, this would really throw you off. Because you'd be like, no, the door is never shut. Like, the party goes on for a week. Like, people come, people go, they take care of stuff, they come back. The door isn't shut. But Jesus all of a sudden shows us, no, there is an end date. There is a cutoff point in this party. And then the last thing is his point that he makes at the end. He says, keep watch. So he says this whole story He says at the end, keep watch. Now this is what I want to do. I want to pull out these significant, these kind of weird things, and I want to show you them together, but I want to show you them in reverse order. So from the point that Jesus makes on back. And this is what it looks. So keep watch, the door was shut. No, we only have enough for ourselves, and it's about the foolish and the wise. And so keep watch means this. Be attentive. Be attentive. Be aware of what's going on. Now notice this in the context of the question. Closest followers ask, hey, end times, what do we need to know? How are you coming back? When's it all happening? What do we need to be aware of? And Jesus says, hey, first thing, be attentive. Keep watch. You need to be aware of what's going on. You need to be mindful of it. And the reason why is the second thing. The door was shut. Because I am going to return. Because Jesus will return. Now this is the part that we struggle with. Because we want to think at any given moment in time, I can make any decision based upon the possibilities of my future. Like at any moment in time, I could become any person who I want to be. And Jesus says this, there's going to be a day where you don't have any more choices. Now that's troubling for us. Because we really like our freedom. Because no, there's going to be a day where you are going to have to bear the consequences of whatever choices you have made. Because there's going to be a day that I am going to return. And what you have done up until then will choose your future and your destiny. So keep watch, because one day I'm going to return. He says, know for yourselves. You can only account for yourself. Again, we're going to hit that later if that bothers you. But you can help others, you can guide others, but you can only account for yourself. And he says, this story is about the foolish and the wise, which means how you live your life matters. Now, if you take all of this, you take all these things, and again, the disciples ask, hey, end times. And Jesus says, this story. Now, if you take all that, what are you walking away with? Where are you going? So he really wants me to figure out the meaning of the 4 blood moons. What do you think he said about the mark of the beast? Like, he said that matters, right? That we should spend a whole lot of time debating the mark of the beast, right? No, he doesn't point to any of that. And this is what I think the story is really about. This is kind of my summary statement. That the primary purpose of prophecy is personal preparation, not prediction. It sounds really fun to say, doesn't it? Because of all the peace. Can we say it together? Are you up for that? Oh, good. Some of you. That is great. So let's actually do the thing where we say it and then we all actually say it instead of just the 5 of you who gave me an affirmative. And with enthusiasm. There you go. So here we go. Let's say it together because I want you to remember. The primary purpose of prophecy is personal preparation, not prediction. And this is what people get so stuck on over and over again, is they always think it's about, we need to figure out the end date that Jesus is going to return. We need to get out our calendars, get out our maps, whatever that is, and we need to figure out the end date. And what Jesus points to here is that is not the purpose of prophecy. And so instead of viewing prophecy like a way to predict the end, I think we should view it like a March Madness tournament bracket. Now, a couple questions. First off, how many of you every year fill out a March Madness bracket? Some of you are missing out on the best things in life, okay? This is one of my favorite things in the world. Okay, for those of you who raised your hands, what? This is weird. This is Kentucky. How did not more of you fill out a March Madness bracket and at least just like write Kentucky the whole way through, no matter how things are going? Oh, that's another day. How many of you have filled out a perfect bracket? Don't lie, we're in church. Okay, good. Now, no one sits down and goes, well, I missed one last year, so I guess I'm not going to do it this next year. No, that doesn't happen. And every year I make my family fill out a bracket because I love watching the games. But I've realized that it is far more fun to watch the games and to yell at the TV when other people are around than just myself. When it's just me, it's kind of creepy. And so it's better when other people are around. So what I've done is I make my family, my nuclear family, Maddie and Emmy, who are 4 and 3, they really struggled on the brackets this year. Did not do a great job. Okay, I actually let them pick all of them. Like, really? North Carolina State University Institute in the Final Four? All right, if that's what you want. And so I make them fill it out. But the one that bugs me more than anything else is my mom fills out a bracket and she beats me about half the time, which is infuriating in and of itself. But what bothers me even more is the way that she picks her teams. And I've heard some of you do this as well. She does not pick her teams based upon seeding, based upon the talent of the players, or based upon the quality of the coaches. She picks her teams based upon which mascot could beat the other mascot. And so we got to look at it like, Arizona State, what's that? That's a Sun Devil. Ooh, Sun Devil, that beats a lot. And then we get this matchup. Does the Blue Devil beat the Sun Devil? And I think she's like, yeah, Blue does. Blue beats Sun. I was like, how does Blue beat Sun? Yeah, but it does. And so she writes it till the end. But this is what I found. This is why I make her do it, that I found this fascinating. Is she doesn't care. Like, she really doesn't. She doesn't care. But all of a sudden, when the games are on, what she'll do is she'll walk up and she'll go, hey, who's winning? Like, oh, so-and-so's winning. Oh, great, I have them. And then she'll sit down and she'll watch the end of the game because she wants to know if she can circle or mark it out. And all of a sudden, something that she would have been completely unaware of, she now pays attention to. And I think that's why the primary purpose of prophecy is personal preparation, not prediction. Because here's the deal. It would be so easy for our spiritual lives and our relationship with God to get put on the back burner. It would be so easy for the busyness of our schedules and all the other priorities that we think we have to take precedence in our life over our relationship with God. And what this understanding of prophecy and being mindful of the end times does is it gives an urgency to it that wouldn't have been there otherwise. Like, think of it like this. If you found out that Jesus was returning at 2 o'clock today, doesn't that reshape your priorities dramatically? Like, doesn't that reshape what you think about? Now, just to be clear, I don't think he's coming back at 2 o'clock today because I just said he's coming back at 2 o'clock today, so don't worry about that. But like, if we actually were focused and paid attention to it continually over time, it would dramatically change how we saw our faith. And I think that's what Jesus is trying to do, is he's saying, hey, keep watch. Keep watch. Because you need to be mindful, because I'm going to return. And when that day comes, there are no more decisions to be made about who you are and who you're becoming and who you're following and what has priority. And so you need to keep watch. You need to be attentive, because how you live matters. Now we say all that and we need to ask this. Okay, so what's it mean to be attentive? If it's about personal preparation, what does it mean to be prepared? And this is where I think a lot of people go off. Is we go, okay, and what we do is we treat our faith like we're studying for a test. And so it's like, okay, so Jesus is returning. So that means I need to hurry up and I need to get all these things right. And I need to hurry up and I need to read a bunch of scripture because I think he wants me to do that. And I need to confess all the things that I did wrong. Hurry, let me write those down. And communion, I don't know what that does, but I need to take that. I'll take it a couple hundred times just to be sure. I need to be baptized. Wait, I need to be rebaptized. I don't know if that does anything. I'll just go swimming as well, just in case, dunk myself under. I don't know if any of these things do anything, but it's like, this is how we think about it. It's like, oh, Jesus is returning, so I need to go through all these things. And what we do is we treat our faith like we're studying for a test. And what that is to me is it's faith as religion, or you could say it like this, faith as formula. It's figuring out the right answers. But this is what we know, is that faith is not formula, that faith is a relationship. This is why, throughout centuries, Christians have pointed to the importance of prayer. In fact, if you read the writings of the early Christians, prayer was second only to Scripture, which they saw as informing how we prayed. Because prayer is our ongoing conversation with God. It's not 10 minutes that we spend here or there. It's the way we continually communicate with God over time. Because prayer is what strengthens the relationship. Because faith is a relationship. That's what it's always been. This is why you can only account for yourself. As much as you want to maybe decide for someone else, the reason why you can only account for yourself is because faith is a relationship. If it was a test, you could give someone else the right answers to a test. But you can't make someone else have a relationship with another person. You can't force that to happen. Now here's what you can do. Is you can talk about that person well. You can set up different encounters for them to continually meet them. And this has shaped an enormous amount of what we do as a church. Is that we can't make anyone have a relationship with God. But what we can do is we can talk about Jesus well. We can talk about each other well. We can engage in things that we think would be honoring to him and to other people. And we can create a place where people continually, in a safe spot, have encounters with God over and over and over again until hopefully a relationship develops and is formed. Because that's what faith is. It's a relationship. Now, we know this. You can't fix a relationship in a second. But you can set it down the right path. And this is what Jesus is continually pointing to. You need to have a focus, and if even we could say it like this, an urgency to having a right relationship with God, because you don't know when he's going to return, but it's going to happen someday. Now, with all that said, and after covering everything else, I want to give you a challenge to leave you with this week. And the challenge is this. Discover the meaning of the fourth. No, I'm just kidding. Really? No, here's my challenge. To love as if Jesus is coming back today. And a lot of times when people say something like this, Jesus returned, I think they get it wrong. They say we need to live as if Jesus is coming back today. And I think that takes us down a bad path where, I don't know, I think we just turn into a country song, you know, we go skydiving, and mountain rocking, climbing, something, bull named Fu Manchu. You know it. I don't know it. You know it. Okay? And I don't think that's it. I think the focus should be that we should love as if Jesus is coming back today. Now, look at it like this. If you knew that God was coming back at 2 o'clock today, how much room would you have in your life for holding grudges? Like, seriously. How much space would you allow in your heart for not forgiving someone? Because there's none at all. Because it's not important. How would you treat and care for those around you if you knew at any moment, at any second, Jesus could be returning? Think about how much of our thoughts and efforts goes to acquiring stuff and things and belongings that are temporary for ourselves. Think about that. How much effort would you put into thinking about those things? And the answer would be none at all, because you understand inherently that it doesn't matter and it's going to go away. And Jesus is saying this, instead of just having that moment of clarity for a second and then letting it go, live your life with that focus. And love as if at any moment, not out of fear, not out of like scare tactics or anything like that, because that's not what it's about. But it gives priority to the relationship and an understanding that Jesus could come back at any moment. Now, some people, they get stuck on one part of this, and they get stuck on the whole judgment thing. I just don't like the idea of hearing that like, God is going to judge us, and God is going to send some people to heaven and send some people to hell. I just don't like that. And I don't know if this is how it works, but I've heard it like this, and I thought this was absolutely brilliant. That heaven and hell are just God fast-forwarding our natural destination into eternity. And this is how it was explained to me. Is that when you follow God, and you put him as the priority in your life, what you are doing is you are becoming a citizen of heaven. Slowly. With bumps and bruises and mess-ups along the way. But what you are doing is, because that is the most important relationship, what you are doing is you're becoming more like God, which is you being like a citizen of heaven. And so heaven is simply God fast-forwarding that into eternity. This is eventually who you would become. Hell is the same thing. If your primary focus in life is you, your desires, your wants, you're going to become prideful and selfish. That's how it's going to be. There are no other options. And so hell is simply God letting your soul take its natural course into eternity. Now, he speeds it up, okay? But he just shows, hey, this is where you're going to end anyway. And think of it like that. Man, heaven would be a group of people who are not self-centered, who glorify God and who want to honor him. Hell would be a group of people who are only cared about themselves and are all prideful and arrogant. And it's simply God letting us take our course. Now, I don't know if that's how it works or not, but that made a lot of sense to me. But I think all this points to one thing, that we need to live our lives and we need to love others as if Jesus could come back at any moment. Not because we're scared, not because we're afraid, but because he has commanded us to keep watch, because we do not know the day or the hour. And I hope before I dismiss this, I hope you'll join us the next 2 weeks as we look at the next 2 stories in this account that Jesus gives. I think they're incredible, and they're so phenomenal when you tie them all together. Before we do that, let me pray for us, and I'll dismiss us. Lord, I thank you so much for the chance that we can get here to have fun, to laugh, to sing your praises and how great you are. But most of all, Lord, for me to open up your word and to just show how clearly, that you show us how clearly you care for us and you love us and you want us to live our lives for you. And Lord, for the person who's here this morning, as they think about the whole relationship thing with you, and it's either been gone for a number of years or it never existed, well, while we understand the relationship will not become strong in a moment, we do know that a relationship can be fixed, or a relationship could be started with any simple decision. And so, Lord, let us see that clearly, that no matter where we are this morning, that we have a choice to follow you. That you have incredible grace, and that you forgive anything. So no matter where we are, no matter where we've come from, that we know that you desire a relationship with us, and all we have to do is reach out to you and begin to follow you. And Lord, for all of us as we're here today, help us to love those around us with attentiveness and with an urgency that comes from knowing that you will return. And I pray this all in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Hey, thank you so much for joining us this morning for part 1 of Prepper's Guide, and we hope to see you back here next week for part 2. Have a great Sunday.